This is an RNZ podcast.
They say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm Kathryn Ryan, and here we draw on my conversations with experts on 9 to Noon to help you navigate family life. To the difficulties some families face trying to get their children to eat a wider variety of foods. With us again today, and welcome back, is Judith Yeabsley. She's a nutritional therapist who describes herself as a picky eating consultant. Her first book was Creating Confident Eaters, and she's followed it up with a new one called Winner, Winner, I Eat Dinner. It outlines 7 steps to help children with their eating habits, but she warns the path is less like a straight line from step 1 to step 7 and more like a drunken monkey on a bike. As long as we get to 7 in the end. Morning, Judith. Welcome back.
Morning, Kathryn. Thanks for having me on.
I'm curious, you begin the book with the myths, and is this just addressing straight off the bat that this can be stressful for parents, frustrating, and just getting advice that it'll all come right can do your head in? What are the most common myths around picky eating?
Well, yes, you're right. I think picky eating is enormously stressful for parents. You know, I have so many parents who it's their first thought in the day is, what am I going to feed my 7-year-old for dinner? Or, you know, what's going to happen if my child goes to camp? And they've got a 5-year-old and their child doesn't go to camp until they're 10. That's how frustrating and stressful it can be. And often it's a real paradoxical thing, because we're told on the one hand, just relax and it'll all come good. And on the other hand, we're told you just need to keep serving, keep serving, keep serving. So on the one hand, we're told to do more. And on the other hand, we're told to just relax.
Is there a phase that most children will go through? One of the myths is that it is just a phase, but is there a phase where most children will be picky about food, or I think, as we've discussed before, they often want reassurance. If they know where their food's coming from, if they're involved a little bit in its preparation, what are some of the what's going on in their little minds when it comes to food at certain ages?
Okay, well, there's a lot to unpack there. So are there certain phases where a child is more likely to be picky? Yes, because from an evolutionary standpoint, when children were starting in the toddler years to move away from mum, they needed to be safe. And therefore, you didn't want them picking up the nice shiny red berries and putting them in their mouth. And so they did get that little bit more discerning because it was a safety thing. And unfortunately, like a lot of these evolutionary things, they're still kicking around. Yeah. So your child at 18 months is more likely, firstly, to be protecting themselves and going, you know what? Don't know that, don't want to eat it. And secondly, they're going through the no phase and finding out where their boundaries are.
These things collide.
Yes, and who's in charge. And so they want to say no. And they say no quite frequently.
It's quite a transition from the age where they'll eat anything, which put anything in their mouths, which is different. That's exploration, right? That's using the mouth as a sense.
Yes.
But all of a sudden we go from anything will go in there to the fussy eating stage. So there is a phase, but are you talking particularly about the phase, or does it become much more acute with some children? And do you work with parents who've got a much more problematic example?
So there's a couple of things. So some children never go into that phase because they find food enormously difficult right from the get-go. So there are some children who, from that first mouthful, say, no, not interested. And obviously, for them, there's a protracted problem, and that's not going to resolve itself simply. Then they're the ones that go into the phase and come out of it perfectly fine. And then they're the ones that go into the phase and suddenly it just seems to snowball. So instead of being, no, I don't fancy the banana, it suddenly becomes, no, I don't want the dinner, the breakfast, the lunch, or the dinner, and it just explodes. And then there are some children who, for whatever reason, have, you know, additional challenges that just make food that little bit more difficult. You know, maybe they're on the spectrum, maybe they've got sensory sensitivities, and food's just really difficult.
So people can hear these phrases, you know, lots of children used to be fussy, but now there aren't anymore. If my child's hungry enough, they'll eat what I serve them. You know, no child starves. So you're hearing these things, and it just can pile on the stress. It actually is that one of the things you need to deal with up front with yourself and your child, that it can become a battleground, that there's actual fear around the whole process? And is there a way you can address that right at the start?
There's definitely fear. And there's fear and there's discomfort. I think discomfort's a really good way to think about it. So if somebody put a plate full of raw chicken in front of you, nothing would get you to eat that raw chicken because it's disgusting. And so for a lot of children, they look down at their plate, and it doesn't matter that it's that it's something that you think is really appealing. They look at it and they see raw chicken, spiders, whatever it might be. And so it's really important that as a parent, we build that comfort for them.
So the new book builds on the earlier one, Creating Confident Eaters. And what's different? What's the approach you're taking here that builds on the earlier one? Okay,
so this one is the 7 simple steps to success. So what it does is work through my 7 simple... There's actually there's 30 to 40 steps to eating, would you believe? But I've distilled it down to 7. And so step 1's on the table, and step 7 is eating. But there's a lot of things that happen in between that build that comfort level that get us to that step 7. And unfortunately, as a society, what we've done is we've set up the expectation that we go from step 2 on the plate to step 7 eating. Now, that's not logical for a child that has any sort of discomfort around food. Plonking the carrot down and then having the expectation of them eating it is not realistic. It also sets up sort of a binary win-lose situation, because if they eat the carrot, tick, we've won. If they don't eat the carrot, it's a fail. But actually, there's all those steps in between that we need to work through. And if we know that our child, if they're touching that carrot, they've made a step forward, then suddenly all the hundreds of times we're serving them that carrot doesn't seem like such a waste of time if they're not eating it, because we're seeing a logical progression.
So what are the stages? What is it you should be looking for to say this is progress?
Okay, so any sort of change in comfort, attitude, approach to the food shows you that things are going better. So if you put the carrot down on the plate and they're like, ooh, get it off the plate, obviously they're not going to be eating it anytime soon. If you put the carrot on the plate and they go, yeah, don't mind it on the plate, probably not going to be eating it, that's still a big step forward from the, ooh, get it off the plate. If they pick the carrot up and go, what is it? Again, that's a step forward. If they pick the carrot up and get it anywhere near their face, so all of those things tell you that what you're doing is making progress.
What age, typically? Is it the full...
It's a full gamut. Yeah. So I mean, you could have a 10-year-old or a 14-year-old doing this.
Yeah. Do you give up on the carrot? When do you say other vegetables being eaten and it's fine? But so this is where there is a difference in age, because obviously younger children tend to have that narrower diet. You're just excited to get some mashed banana or muley or anything in them. So let's do a little of age stuff. Let's do that sort of toddler age. And again, are we sitting in the same place as part of the ritual all the time at that age? What is it that you're going through to try and get from step 1 to step 2 to step 3?
Well, I would actually be recommending a lot of this stuff is done away from the table.
Right.
Because at the table, it's
all
all about
environment.
eating. Yeah, it's about eating, and we're stressed and we're like, oh my goodness, I hope they're going to eat it today. And that comes across. But if we're in the supermarket, if we're washing it at the sink, if we're putting it in the fridge, if we're chopping it on a board, or, I always say, if you've got an 18-month-old, they can help you do dinner. So you can put them on the floor with a big bowl. You can give them a head of lettuce. They can rip some leaves off. They can wash it in the water. They can rip it into pieces. They can put it in a bowl. They can get some cherry tomatoes, wash them in the water, pop them in the bowl, bring it to the table. Your 18-month-old has made a salad.
And this comes back to that age where they've transitioned into, what is this, I'm suspicious. And by being hands-on, that helps ease that, what is this, I'm suspicious.
But if you're 10 years old, that's still valuable. Because if your 10-year-old is not eating anything, investment is not going to magically get your 10-year-old eating a salad. But if you have less of a discomfort around salad, you are more likely to eat it and more likely to eat it over time.
Are children more sensitive to some smells, tastes and textures as we're looking at what they're doing from our perspective and not seeing what's going on for them?
Yes, so there are children who are very, very sensitive to textures, very, very sensitive to smells, very sensitive to all sorts of things around food. Food is the most complicated thing we do physiologically because it's all the senses. And so if you are smell sensitive or if you are touch sensitive, then food is probably going to be a bit of a challenge for you.
Again, do you keep persevering then with certain foods, or do you accept that there is a food that kid just finds disgusting, and is there a substitute?
If there's a food, and we all have one thing that we go, ooh, awful. But if you've got a whole food group, or if you've got a whole set of textures, that's when it gets a bit more challenging. And the other thing with this is if we are texture sensitive and we avoid that texture, often we actually become more sensitive to it over time. So in actual fact, in thinking we're protecting our child, we can actually be doing the opposite. And
so persevere.
And so persevere, but there's ways that we do. Obviously, there's gentle ways to do that. And did you know, and this one always trips me out, is that if you are very sensitive to a texture in your mouth, if you desensitize your hands and your feet to that texture, it actually helps.
So the touching again.
So the touching.
So when we go stop playing with your food, are we sometimes meddling with a process that can be helpful?
Yes, absolutely. And experts now say that if your child never went through the playing with food stage, which is the learning phase, as old as 8, they recommend that you go back.
You go back. And you go get your fingers in it.
Yeah, and you go get your
throw it
fingers
across
in
the kitchen.
Yeah. Hopefully not putting pumpkin in your hair, but yes. That
but
theory.
Don't obsess when a child is touching or chasing it around the plate or whatever. That is actually a normal thing to do. It's a part of a progression.
Yes, but then we've, obviously
got to get beyond that.
We also have household rules and mealtime rules. So there's ways to play with your food. But so much of that can actually be done away from the table. If your child's involved in shopping and cooking and prepping and growing and all that sort of stuff, then they're doing that away from the table.
In some cases, children won't even have food near them.
Yes.
And what do you do?
Then it's that going through the 7 steps. So if we're not happy with it even being on the table, and that is for some children really challenging, they don't want a food near them on the table, then it's that gradual desensitization. It's getting them more and more comfortable. So, for example, your child goes, bananas, no, ooh, bananas, awful. But can your child carry the bananas from the kitchen in a bowl and put them on the table, for example?
It really is that specific. It really is. Just gradually getting them more and more sensitised to being in the presence of, in the first instance, a certain food.
Yes. A good analogy is the swimming pool. You're frightened of water. You don't take your child down and chuck him in the deep end. You take them down, they sit on the side, they look at it, they put their little finger in, they dabble their fingers in, they get their wrists in, then they go their feet, whatever it might be. It's that gradual progression.
Is there a role for modelling? And, we all eat strange ways these days. It's not always at a table together. And is that a factor? Should you be modelling what you're eating to your child in whatever way you can?
Your child absorbs a lot more by osmosis than they do by us teaching. One of my favourite and least favourite phrases is, when our child leaves home, they follow very little of our advice and almost all of our actions. So if we translate that into eating, us modelling is probably our most powerful tool as a parent.
So this is interesting, because often you'll have the main part of your meal when you've perhaps got your youngster off to bed because you want to sit down and enjoy it, but they're missing out seeing you eating certain foods.
Yeah, and I always say that a lot of parents eat a lot of vegetables that they hide it really well from their children, because they have cereal for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, and then they have a huge salad or whatever for dinner, but that's after their child goes to bed, and their child never sees that.
So our phases are getting it to the table, getting it on the plate, maybe touching it or playing with it, and then what's the ultimate breakthrough? It's being eaten, but is it, again, you're not straight to point 7 by that point. What can happen by the time you're seeing a child beginning to incorporate some types of foods, but it's hit and miss?
Yes. Well, then it's just a question. If you know that they're starting to become more comfortable, what you're doing is working. Fabulous. We just keep going.
So you build a comfort level. And when it comes to adding new foods, again, is there a wise way to do this that avoids falling back into the same traps?
I would say, and I teach every parent that I work with this, don't think about eating, think about interaction. Because if your child is interacting with that food, then you are doing everything you need to do for the child to eat that food. So, for example, let's go back to the carrot because it's an easy one. If that carrot appears frequently on their plate, then they're seeing it. If they're washing it, then they're touching it. If we put it, for example, on a skewer with a chunk of cheese, which is a favourite food, then they are, we just, each time we do these things, we're just taking them a little bit closer to that eating comfort level.
How do you celebrate success or measure progress with the child?
Okay, so I would be recommending that firstly, we do celebrate because it's a long road and it can be quite brutal. If we're stressed and we're frustrated and we don't feel anything's going right, if we have little breakthroughs, it's really, really important to go, you know what, I've done something right, something's going right, something's working, so we need to celebrate that. And secondly, we just need to look at this a little bit differently and not be hyper-focused on eating. Because when we do that, as I say, we're back to that win or fail. But actually, if our child is now in the supermarket going, but mummy, can we try this new, can we try these blueberries? Then that's a massive step forward. You probably get them home and they won't eat them. But the fact that they were interested enough to point them out, to ask you about them, to bring them home, that's a huge psychological step forward.
It really is a process, isn't it?
It's a massive process.
We just say, produce the food, put the food on the table, eat it. That's the stage of life we're at.
Absolutely.
But not for kids. There's some really good little tricks in here. Sometimes the aroma is what will put a child off. And one of your tips is you can mix food so that there's an aroma they find pleasant in there. Could you give an example, perhaps?
Well, for example, there might be, for example, broccoli. They might go, oh, broccoli, no, terrible smell, don't want it. But maybe if we have the broccoli next to the bacon, then the broccoli smell is overpowered by the bacon smell and they like the bacon. Or maybe we have the broccoli and we have the world's smallest piece of broccoli. I mean, we're talking, you can hardly see this thing.
But it's there.
And it's got a massive wad of cheese on top of it.
Yes.
But if they're then comfortable
putting
that in their mouth,
yeah,
that's huge.
And another one is textures, of course, and there's a great tip here, wanting a child to be introduced to mash and pointing out that inside that roast potato or that baked potato, there is the mash. Again, it's almost like a scientific process these little minds are going through. Like, what's this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, but it is telling our child that, explaining to them so that they have a comfort level with it. So I've got a great example for you. I love this. A 4-year-old who would only eat chicken nuggets. And so his dad wanted him to eat a chicken schnitzel. So he told him the chicken nugget was like, the chicken schnitzel was like a nugget that he'd run over by his truck. And the 4-year-old went, okay, that makes sense. Big flat nugget.
There you go, stories. A couple more just to touch on before I let you go. Creating a positive atmosphere, being relaxed, and I like this also, take away the pressure to perform off the table. That sometimes meals they should always actually be about bonding as much as the eating. So it doesn't always have to be, what's tonight's 3 rounds on eating? It's about being comfortable in that place and in that presence.
Yes.
And the other one I love is feeding is like reading. We've got to keep at it. And have an attitude that it's something that gets stronger. The more we do of it, the more we persist. It's never just done and dusted.
No.
Wonderful stuff. Thank you so much, Judith. Judith Yeabsley, When Winner, I Eat Dinner is her second book. And it follows on from the earlier Creating Confident Eaters. It's 7 steps and strategies. There's so much detail and so many examples in there. Thank you, Judith.
No worries. Thank you, Kathryn. It's been great to be on.